Well, Ecclesia, if you don't know, this is the Sunday before Lent, and it is also the last sermon in our series that we have been doing called Neighborhoods, Not Towers, and we've been centering that on the life and really ministry of Fred Rogers. It's been such a fun series, and as we think about Lent coming up, this Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. I don't know about you, but I usually need a little bit of warning. Like, I need to think a couple days before about what I want to do for Lent personally and communally. If you don't know, Lent is a time of 40 days, not counting Sunday, leading up to Easter. It's a time of reflection, of repentance, of renewal. My friend Terry Williams, he gave a TED Talk and recently is writing a book about living a yellow light lifestyle. And what it's about is that oftentimes in our lives, we need to slow down. So many of us are going to green light, speeding up to get the next light. I know I often feel like I live like that. And Lent is a time to slow down and invite new rhythms and practices and make space for God. And my therapist once gave me some of the best advice I've ever received. She told me, make space in your life before you know what you're going to fill that space with. And as somebody who was chronically and compulsively busy, in fact, I would say there was a time in my life where busyness was my drug of choice. Creating space in my life without filling it with something gave me anxiety. And we're gonna watch a video about someone in our community named Betty. And Betty had space in her life because she was retired. And this is how Betty decided to use that time.
Some people shape a community not by being loud or visible, but by showing up quietly week after week with steady love. For years, Betty has been one of those people. At 82 years old, she kneels on the floor with our smallest children, offering comfort and attention.
I had retired from teaching, and I saw that we're blessed with lots of families, lots of young children. And when my kids were young, I helped with them, and I thought, well, it'd be fun to try again. They come here, and it's an act of faith to leave mom and daddy, maybe for the first time. When they start out, they may not be walking yet, and we celebrate as they start doing that. They may not be talking. When they leave, they can do all kinds of things. Our kids contribute to us so much. Their truthfulness, their openness, their excitement. But I've been a mother and a grandmother, and I know how much I wanted my children to have loving, God-fearing, nurturing people with them, praying for them, knowing them, encouraging them at every, all the way.
As much as Betty loves being with our youngest children, the physical demands of early childhood room have become harder over time. So Betty is retiring from serving in early childhood, trusting that the love she has given will continue through others.
I'm grateful for God's presence in this room and all the people and all the workers, all the little ones, all the parents. I mean, it's just part of His kingdom, and it's nice to be part of it.
Let's give it up for Betty. Like Betty, maybe for Lent, you want to lean into a new practice. You want to create space in your life so that you can participate in a rhythm just as Betty did. Because one thing that we've learned from Mr. Rogers is that some of the most sacred things that we can do in this lifetime is to minister and to pour into our young people. That is what Mr. Rogers did, what we've been learning about this whole series. And so if you are interested in volunteering in our kids space, and we actually do need more volunteers right now, there's a QR code up there, and you can sign up to volunteer or go to the Connect table at the back, and you can get plugged in to live a story like Betty or Mr. Rogers, and to live into the rhythm of our young people. And for some of us, if you want to do that, it might mean slowing down, creating space in your life. There's a video of Mr. Rogers that we're going to listen to, or recording. And Pastor Chris sang this song last time. And I've been thinking about it all week as it relates to slowing down and entering into Lent. And this is what Mr. Rogers sang.
I like to take my time. I mean that when I want to do a thing, I like to take my time to do it right. I mean I just might make mistakes if I should have to hurry up. And so I like to take my time to tie my shoes, to eat, to get dressed, to go to sleep at night, to sing a song for you in everything I do. I like to take my time. I mean that when I want to do a thing, I like to take my time to do it right. I mean I just might make mistakes if I should have to hurry up. And so I like to take my time.
I don't know about you, but I've needed this message this past week. And in fact, on Tuesday, me and some other people on the Ecclesia staff were filming for our social media account at the West Side. And I got a text from my spiritual director that I was behind on 3 payments, 3 sessions. And he's a therapist, spiritual director. His name is Bill Curley. And I looked at the message and I got embarrassed that I had missed some payments. And I rushed to my Venmo and I sent him the amount for 3 sessions. And what I realized later was that I sent that money to a guy on Venmo named Bill Kirby instead of Curly. And Venmo acts just like cash. So I've been messaging Bill Kirby all week, being like, hey, my name's Erica. I thought you were a different person. Would you mind sending that money back? So Bill Kirby, if you're listening online, give me my money back. But I was in a rush, and that's what happens. I had shame about not making the payment on time. I rushed to my Venmo, put it back in my pocket, and realized later I had just given a large transaction to a stranger on the internet who's not even active on Venmo. This is what happens when we rush. And I'm afraid, Ecclesia, if we don't slow down, if we don't take time for rhythms like Lent, we might make a bigger mistake. And that's to get to the end of our life and realize that we were chasing the wrong things the entire time. That's the power of slowing down to reflect. And so today we're going to read Matthew 17, verses 1 through 9, which is, I believe, a story about this. And it's called the Transfiguration story of Christ. And it begins in Matthew 17. 6 days later, and by the way, this was 6 days after Jesus had told his disciples about anticipating his death. Jesus went up to the top of a high mountain with Peter, James, and John. There, something spectacular happened. Jesus' face began to glow and gleam and shine like the morning sun. His clothes gleamed too, bright white like sunlight, mirroring of a snowfall. He was, in a word, transfigured. Suddenly, there at the top of the mountain were Moses and Elijah, those icons of the faith, beloved of God, and they talked to Jesus. Peter said, Lord, how amazing that we are here to see these heroes of our faith, these men through whom God spoke. Should I quickly build some shelter? 3 small tabernacles for you, for Moses, and for Elijah. So imagine they're on a mountain. Jesus is shining bright. Something supernatural is happening to his body. And these ancient figures from the Old Testament, Moses and Elijah, show up. It's this beautiful moment. And Peter's response is, should I build you something so we can stay here? As Peter spoke, a bright cloud enveloped all of them. And a voice from the cloud said, this is my beloved son. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. The story continues. This voice from heaven terrified the 3 disciples, and they fell prostrate on the ground. But Jesus, who was by this time used to his disciples being plagued by fear, touched them. Jesus said, "Get up, don't be afraid." And when the disciples got up, they saw that they were alone with their Lord. The 4 men hiked back down the mountain, and Jesus told his disciples to stay silent. Jesus said, "Don't tell anyone what happened here, not until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." So here Jesus is predicting the future, saying, if you go tell everyone what happened on this mountain, it's probably not going to make a lot of sense. It's going to confuse them. So let's keep this, what happened on the mountain. And looking backwards, someday this story is going to make more sense, because people will realize after my resurrection that I really am the true God. I think one thing that we can take from this story is that we want to stay on top of the mountain, but God would rather we listen to Jesus. If you remember in the story, Peter's first reaction to meeting these ancient prophets and seeing this miraculous light shine through the face of Jesus, his response was to build 3 tabernacles on the mountain. He was planning to stay up on the mountain in that glory. But God would rather he listened to Jesus, because how God responded in that moment was not, yes, you should build us all 3 forts. It's that listen to Jesus. He has something to say. And we want to stay on the mountaintop, right? In that moment, I would imagine that they had a moment of clarity about who Jesus was and how God was working in the world. And we love certainty and clarity and being on a mountaintop. But life does not just exist on a mountaintop. And Jesus and God seem to know that life is not just this euphoric, supernatural, enlightened feeling all the time. There are mountains and valleys. There are moments that change us where we do feel like we're on a mountaintop. For me, it was meeting my 2 sons for the first time. And then 3 weeks later, we were back in the hospital for RSV in a valley. This is life, full of mountains and valleys. Sometimes it can happen over a lifetime, over a week, or in a second. You're taken from a mountain to a valley. Last weekend, we were coming off of a big win for pre-K 4-5 basketball. I coach my son's team. It's co-ed, and we had an 8:00 a.m. game. And I was kind of high after the game. I'm not kidding you. I take this really seriously, apparently. I was so excited because all of our players scored besides 2 players, and the 2 players that did not score contributed in other big ways. And it was the first game where we had balanced scoring and everyone contributed, and my coaching heart was just on fire. So it's 9:00 a.m. I'm 2 cold brews deep. We got the W. Everybody contributed. And we're playing outside in our yard. My son Jet still has his jersey on. He's catching lizards, and it was a little bit chilly, and when it's cold, the lizards are slow. So he caught a lot of lizards. And I'm pushing my son, who's 2, under this big magnolia tree in my neighbor's yard, and they have a little toddler swing. And the weather is perfect, and the sun is out. And my son comes over to me, and he says, "Mom, look at this lizard." And we look at it together, and we watch its color transform in real time. It went from a dark black to a light brown. And in that moment, I just thought, God is amazing. And that lizard took a leap of faith, out of my son's hand. And he tried to catch it, and he's on his hands and knees trying to cup it into the grass, and it's fast. And all of a sudden, we can't find it anywhere. And I thought, well, maybe it just has really good camouflage right now. So I'm down on my hands and knees, and we're going like this to the blades of grass, just trying to detect some movement. And I said, Jet, we'll have to find another lizard. And he said, no, Mom. And I went in, and I made some sandwiches, peanut butter and jelly. And I'm making this sandwich, and I'm spreading some peanut butter on the sandwich. And I get a little itch on my butt. And I said, Garrett. And it became pretty clear to me that there was a lizard in my pants. And I cried, screamed, bloody murder. I took off these long pants, I threw them, and I said, Garrett, look at my pants. There's a lizard. And sure enough, just in the middle of my pants on the floor was a lizard looking up at us. And it felt a lot less holy than that first time I saw it. But I thought, I just went from a mountaintop to pure terror in 10 minutes. And this is life. And while that's a funny story about a lizard, usually it's not so funny. Oftentimes it's cancer. It's an affair. It's divorce. It's an unexpected death. It's the unveiling of sexual abuse, a moment where your life is forever changed and there's no going back. Because life doesn't just exist on mountaintops. And Richard Rohr has this to say about where we find the love of Christ. He says there are only two major paths by which the human soul comes to God: the path of great love and the one of great suffering. Both finally come down to great suffering, because if we love anything greatly, we will eventually suffer for it. This is what it's like to live within crucifixion and resurrection. There is no resurrection without a crucifixion. And the rest of the story in Matthew reminds us of that, because Jesus and his disciples descend down that mountain, and in Matthew 14 it reads, they had come down from the mountain and they had headed toward town. They came to a crowd, and as they approached the crowd, a man rushed up to Jesus and knelt before him. The man from the crowd said, Lord, have mercy on my son. He has seizures. Sometimes when they come on, my son falls into the fire and into a pond. We are very concerned for him. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. I tell you this, if you had even a faint spark of faith, even faith as tiny as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and because of your faith, the mountain would move. If you had just a sliver of faith, you would find nothing impossible. But this kind is not realized except through much prayer and fasting. So Jesus is saying, through prayer and fasting, you will find your faith. And while Jesus did heal this son, I find this to actually be the most relatable part of this mountain story. It's not the mountaintop where Jesus was shining bright and it was obvious where God was, who he was, and that you were with him. Oftentimes, life and love exists in the valleys. It exists when a parent wants to heal their child and doesn't know what to do but to go to Jesus and say, please. If you're in this room and a parent, you've been in that situation at some point, whether it was a health crisis, a mental health crisis, a time where you just went to God and you said, what do I do? Help me with my child. This is where Scripture brings us to time and time again, that there will be mountains, but there are valleys, and our faith is required for both. And so I wonder, Ecclesia, what mountain are you climbing? People spend their whole lives, as Stephen Covey and Thomas Merton has both been attributed to this quote, people spend their whole lives climbing the ladder of success, only to find out that the ladder was leaning up against the wrong wall. I think about that metaphor often. I think about, as we talk about, this series is neighborhoods, not towers. We are living in times when the power of a tower is seductive. Power is used to abduct neighbors from neighborhoods, to protect sexual violence and sexual predators. And yet the abuse of power is nothing new. Jesus was crucified by the powers of empire and state violence. Towers have always been seductive, but it's not the way of Jesus. The voice of God does not say, yes, Peter, build those tabernacles. He says, Peter, live in this moment and listen to Jesus. Sometimes listening to Jesus means building something, creating something big. And sometimes it means descending down the mountain. For a number of years, my husband and I ran this nonprofit called Project 88. And with your help at Ecclesia, where we had our fundraisers, and with our generous board of directors, we were able to raise almost $2 million for Houston area public schools and supporting the counselors within them. And this work was kind of my baby before kids. Like, I loved running this nonprofit. And eventually there came a time where I felt like it was time to wind it up. And we had just had one of our best fundraising years ever. And there was a pandemic. I was pregnant. The HISD takeover later happened. And it just felt like a time to wind it up. But I didn't want to disappoint anyone if I didn't keep doing this work. And I think this is the discernment in our lives when we listen to God, is that there are times to start things. There are times to wrap seasons up. And that these questions in our lives depend on us to be listening to God, not just putting our heads down and building, but as Jesus reminds us on that mountain, stopping and listening to what God has to say in our lives. And I believe that is what Lent is really for, to do just that. Did anyone see that viral story with the Norwegian skier who apologized for cheating on his girlfriend? I'm not sure if it was the right move. Maybe it was, I don't know. But what I do know is that he realized his ladder was against the wrong wall. He thought, here I am, medaling in the Olympics. I've worked my whole life for this, and this moment doesn't even feel good because the person I love the most isn't with me in this moment. This is the power of Lent, to discern what matters and what ladders are worth climbing. James Vanderbeek from Dawson's Creek passed away, as y'all probably know. And there was this viral video that went around. And I know you've probably already seen it, but it relates so well to this sermon, I just have to show it. So we're going to watch that video.
Today's my birthday, and it has been the hardest year of my life, and I wanted to share something that I learned with y'all. When I was younger, I used to define myself as an actor, right? Which was never really all that fulfilling. And then I became a husband, and that was much better. And then I became a father, and that was the ultimate. I could define myself then as a loving, capable, strong, supportive husband, father, provider, steward of the land that we're so lucky to live on. And for a long time, that felt like a really good definition to the question, who am I? What am I? And then this year, I had to look my own mortality in the eye. I had to come nose to nose with death. And all of those definitions that I cared so deeply about were stripped from me. I was away for treatment, so I could no longer be a husband that was helpful to my wife. I could no longer be a father who could pick up his kids and put them to bed and be there for them. I could not be a provider because I wasn't working. I couldn't even be a steward of the land because at times I was too weak to prune all the trees during the window that you're supposed to prune them. And so I was faced with the question, if I am just a too skinny, weak guy alone in an apartment with cancer, what am I? And I meditated, and the answer came through, I am worthy of God's love. Simply because I exist. And if I'm worthy of God's love, shouldn't I also be worthy of my own? And the same is true for you.
Ecclesia, this is the message of Jesus. This is the message of Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers says, I like you just the way you are. Jesus says, I love you just the way you are. And those lyrics to that Dawson's Creek theme song reminds us of the sacred theology of Jesus as well, believe it or not. And we are going to sing it together. Now, online, one thing I noticed is that the online service only picks up my voice, which is so unfortunate. But I'd like to sing these lyrics together to remind us of the sacred truth of this Transfiguration story. And you guys got to sing loud. Please sing loud. I don't want to wait for our lives to be over. I want to know right now, what will it be? I don't want to wait for our lives to be over. Will it be yes or will it be sorry? See, at the end of our lives, we're going to have some sorries to make. We are. We're human. We're going to have a lot of sorries to make. But I hope we slow down enough to know that when we are climbing the right and wrong building, all while knowing that our striving and our climbing was never what made us love. It was ourselves, just by being us. As he reminded us, that's what it takes for God to love you. You being you. Mr. Rogers said it. Jesus said it. We love you just the way you are. And the ending of that song is equally as perfect, so we're going to keep going. So open up your morning light, say a little prayer for I. You know that if we are to stay alive, then see the love in every eye. This is the message of Jesus, to see the love in every eye, in the eyes of the Jew, the Greek, the Gentile, the Samaritan, the stranger. There is nobody with eyeballs that does not deserve love. We are to see it in each other, because that is the only mountain worth climbing. Will you pray with me? Dear God, we thank you for the life of Jesus that set the way for people like Fred Rogers and us to learn from. That when we get confused and caught up in our own busyness, that you point us back to the climb that matters. A life of accepting your love so that we may also see the love in every eye. Amen.